All right. So if you missed class or if your Wi-Fi wasn't working very well, I'm going to go over the rhetorical analysis information that we talked about in class this last week. So rhetorical analysis, as I've said, is the basis of this class. And it's basically understanding how and why writers use language in order to get what they want from a specific audience. If you think about rhetoric, it means the way that we use language, and analysis means basically the same thing as dissection does in biology. You take a piece of writing and you pull it apart. You look at all the different parts to see kind of how they function, and then you put it back together to determine how effective it was at convincing the audience. When you read the Thompson Reader, chapters 1 through 4, and you filled out the exam on that, one of the questions was about the rhetorical triangle. So, what the rhetorical triangle does by putting the audience in one corner, the speaker in the other, and the context or subject matter in the third corner of the triangle is trying to show you that when one part of that triangle changes, then the rhetoric changes, the way that language is used changes. So, for example, Abigail Adams, in your pre assessment, writing the letter to her son, if she was writing that letter to anyone else, she wouldn't be able to use some of the same strategies that she uses in the letter in order to get him to do what she wants. And in the Taylor Swift letter to Apple, if the audience changes, then her motivation and purpose might change in writing the letter. All right, so let's take a look at how we do rhetorical analysis. It's a very simple 3-step process that I'm teaching you. What, how, and why. So the what is basically asking yourself, what is the purpose for writing the piece? Or what does the author want? Now, the purpose and the motivation can be very different from what they want. Like, for example, if my motivation to write a letter to Yale College is to convince them that I am a good candidate for a doctoral degree there, that's my motivation is to get into Yale College. What I want is I want to convince them that I am the right kind of candidate for them, right? And they're kind of linked. We'll take a look at Taylor Swift, and we'll talk a little bit about how her motivation might differ from what she wants in a little bit. Okay, so first of all, what's the motivation or purpose? And then how? What techniques is the author using to achieve that? How does the author use language in order to get what he or she wants? So then the other thing that we talk about is how that strategy, or the how, is why is it effective for the particular audience that the piece is intended for in order to achieve the purpose. So let's take a look at that with Taylor Swift's letter to Apple. So in class, we talked a little bit about this Taylor Swift's letter to Apple, and we did some kind of background work on it. So I separated it into 3 parts, the 3 paragraphs. The first paragraph has its own purpose. The second paragraph has its own purpose. And the third paragraph has its own purpose. Let me walk you through it. So the first paragraph, the purpose is to provide background information and to introduce the topic of the letter in a way that's a little not offensive. She doesn't want to put Apple, she doesn't want to insult Apple as she starts it off. How does she do that? Well, she's trying to show a little bit of a contrast between what Apple might be aware of, or what her audience might be aware of, by saying, I'm sure you are aware, and then I'm not sure that you know. So we've got that kind of contrast, that juxtaposition of what is known and what is not known. But then in order to keep them Apple happy and not threatening them or making them feel threat, like we learned about in the oatmeal and in the allegory of the cave, she refers to Apple as being historically progressive and generous, while at the same time referring to their action as being shocking and disappointing. So she's setting up the contrast between what they did and what she knows about them. So Apple cannot be too insulted because she compliments them as being historically progressive and generous, but she also expresses her disapproval by saying shocking and disappointing. And all of this is to try to give the background behind why she's writing the letter in a way that isn't going to offend Apple. All right, the next part, her purpose and motivation. She is trying to show that there is a problem and who it affects. And she's trying to separate herself from the effects of the problem. So she does that right away by saying, this is not about me. And then she sets it up with another juxtaposition and use of anaphora by repeating, this is about, this is about, this is about. So she says, this isn't about me, and this is about three different types of people: the new artist and band, the young songwriter, the producer. So it's not just about the singer, it's about the people behind the scenes. And she uses that to kind of show them through specific examples of the people that are being affected. It's an appeal to pathos, especially when it's teamed with the connotative diction of just got her first cut, the artist or band that just released their first single, not be paid, the producer who works tirelessly to innovate and create. And then she goes back to kind of complimenting Apple, like the innovators and creators at Apple. So she's trying to make a connection between the people that they're hurting and they themselves. All right. And then she ends with an appeal to logos. So they are working, but they won't get paid for a quarter years of their work, right? All right. And then the third paragraph, she goes back to like kind of providing her response to the critics who might say, oh, Taylor Swift, she's just rich and spoiled, right? That she's greedy and she wants more money. So she says, it's not just mine complaints, but I'm speaking for other people. So here she wants Apple to know that there are other people involved than just her, and she's speaking on their behalf. All right. So overall, what does she want from this letter? She wants Apple to pay artists during the 3-month free trial period. She doesn't want people to be charged for the 3 months free trial period, because that would be bad. Her fans wouldn't like that. But what she wants is she wants them to make a payment to the artists. And she uses all these different methods to do that. And her purpose changes slightly within the letter. However, one thing that is not necessarily known is that Taylor Swift didn't send this letter privately to Apple. She posted it on social media and basically gave it as a, quote, open letter to Apple. So her audience isn't really Apple, is it? Her audience is her fans, right? So then you want to think about her motivation for writing this letter. So her purpose may be to get Apple to pay people, but maybe that changes her motivation to know that her actual audience are her fans. Maybe her motivation is to let her fans know what a good person she is, right? Because even though this 3-month free thing doesn't affect her because she makes lots of money, as she says in the letter, she wants them to know that she's looking out for the little guy. And that will increase her standing in their eyes. So this is one of those ways where the author's motivation may separate slightly from what they want to get out of the letter. Okay, let's talk about that in terms of Abigail Adams' letter to her son. So what I did in class is I worked through the first section of this letter, and I talked about how Abigail Adams was writing a letter to her son, and therefore the techniques that she uses in the letter is very different than if she was writing a letter to a neutral third party who was trying to decide whether or not to travel to France, right? With your son, you can be a lot more straightforward and you can have a different kind of tone to the letter. And she sets that tone up very well in the first couple paragraphs. So in the first couple paragraphs of the letter, Abigail's purpose in writing the letter is to let her son know, to reassure him that he did the right thing when he agreed to go on the trip. And she uses an extremely interesting motherly tone. It is not a calm, loving motherly tone. It's kind of a superior to an inferior tone. So she's got a superior tone. For example, we look at this sentence right here, the second sentence of the first paragraph. Yes, she expresses she might be worried that there were some dangers on the sea, but she's not really concerned about that. She goes to this sentence right here, and she says, if I had thought your reluctance arose from proper deliberation or that you were capable of judging what was most for your own benefit, I should not have urged you to accompany your father and brother when you appeared so averse to the voyage. She's not saying in that sentence, man, I wish I hadn't sent you. No. What she's saying is, if I had thought that you were smart enough to choose for yourself and capable enough to make the right decision, then I wouldn't have urged you to go to France with your father. So basically, in the first paragraph, she's calling him not smart enough and not old enough to judge what's right for him. It's the old mom thing. I know what's best for you. You don't know what's best for you. And she sets that up right away. So that tone is the one that we follow throughout the entire letter. And that's a tone that you can only use basically with your children, right? No one else, like I can't go up to you and say, I know better than you know. I mean, I could, but I wouldn't. So then she gets to the second part, and her purpose is to explain to him one of the reasons why he'll have a better time during this trip. And she says, your knowledge of the language must give you greater advantages. So it's an appeal to logic. She is saying, now you know French, your trip this time will be much better than the last time. So purpose is to convince him that he made the right decision. How she does that? By using a motherly tone and by presenting an appeal to logic, by saying that he knows French now and that she knows better than him. She also uses an appeal to ethos by presenting herself as being an authority figure over him. Why is that effective to your child? I don't know if it is effective, probably more effective in Abigail Adams' time period than it would be today, because children today are much more rebellious than children during this time period might have been to their parents. So clearly she knows that she's not going to lose his affection as a result of telling him that she knows what's best for him. All right, so then what we did is we went through each section of the letter, and kids looked at each section and did the same thing. So for section 2, what is the purpose behind this section? What is the motivation? What does the author want out of this section? How does the author go about doing it? What are some of the techniques that are being used? And why is it effective for the audience? So that's basically what we did in class. And hopefully that gives you a better understanding of what it was that you missed. This slide right here, the what, how, and the why slide, those are the questions that you want to keep in your head basically all year. And when you look at your homework assignment for the weekend, which is to look at, wait for it, Malcolm X's letter to MLK, one of your homework assignments for the weekend. When you look at this letter, Malcolm X's letter to MLK, there's a couple things you need to do ahead of time. You need to know who the speaker and the audience is. So do a little research on MLK and Malcolm X's relationship. And I'd like you to do a little research into the time period where the letter was written. In particular, this event that Malcolm X invites MLK to, the Harlem Rally on August 10th, 1963. Do a little research into that so you know a little bit more about it. And then think about, what does Malcolm X want? What is his motivation and his purpose for writing the letter? What sort of strategies does he use in order to convince MLK to do what he wants? And why might those strategies be effective for the audience? Okay, hopefully that gives you a good introduction to rhetorical analysis.